There are new questions this morning about presidential candidate Donald Trump's ability to make it onto the stage of the first Republican primary debate. Fox has clarified a requirement for entry into that first debate. Besides finishing in top 10 in the national polls, candidates also must file their financial disclosure forms on time. The move raises the stakes for Trump, who has not yet revealed his full financial assets. That was for appearing on the debate stage. Trump tells the Washington Post he will meet the requirement due next Wednesday. And in another interview last night, Trump would not commit to backing the eventual Republican nominee.
I mean, look, I'm not a politician. You know, every politician immediately is supposed to say, oh, absolutely, absolutely. I have to see who wins. And frankly, I think we're going to win. I really think our message is much better. I will make unbelievable trade deals. I'll bring jobs back to our country. I'll bring security back to our country. I really think we're going to win. I watch everybody. I don't see their message. And you can say what you want. I know you like him, and I like him too. Rick Perry, he did a lousy job on the border when he was governor of Texas. What a horrible job he did. Worse than him, though, is Jeb Bush. Jeb Bush is a disaster in so many different ways. I have to see, Sean, who wins.
Hey, Mark Halpern, so let's dig into this a little bit. Donald Trump is going to be on that stage August 6th. There's no way Fox keeps him off the stage if he finishes in the top 10. Front page of the Times today, there's a Barbaro Haberman J-Mart joint talking about Trump as potential problem now, but also as maybe a third-party candidate down the road. Do you think there's any truth to him running as a third-party candidate?
I think he'll tout it out there, but no, I think it's unlikely he'd do that. But the threat that he might is one thing that Republicans have to take seriously. If someone like Trump ran as a third-party candidate, even if he wasn't on the ballot in all 50 states, it would really cut into Republicans' ability to win the general election. That is one of the dimensions that makes dealing with Trump so difficult. They want him to be part of the Republican team, but many of them don't want him to represent the Republican team. He's given a speech this weekend in Arizona on immigration. I think it's going to be the dominant political event of the weekend. As long as he can draw big crowds, as long as he can draw press attention, as long as his poll numbers stay high, this is a problem for the Republican Party to deal with, because Trump has a message that appeals to a lot of people.
What's hilarious about that piece was, the underlying thesis was that Republicans don't want to push back too hard for fear of offending a lot of voters that like Trump. Trump is the most hated candidate in the race. Every poll bears this out. There maybe Chris Christie on one or two of these polls. Trump is basically reviled by a huge portion of the Republican base. If Republican elder statesmen are so afraid of pushing back on this guy, what are they supposed to do? This isn't Nancy Reagan they're going after. I think they would earn a lot of kudos.
That doesn't apply to Jeb Bush. He's been in a brawl with him for 10 days.
And he's been Jeb is a little bit better, but he follows.
He's been harsher on Trump than Hillary.
This.
I mean, you know, Trump went after Jeb's wife, Kalimba, and Jeb punched right back. I don't think that's true about the top tier of Republican candidates, and I don't think there's any fear. I mean, I think that
that was the piece. They were quoted in the piece saying that they were afraid that they would get voted back.
But I don't think that's played out on the trail. I mean, I think when Trump punches Jeb, he punches him right back. I think Trump is a gift, because Trump is everything that the modern Republican Party isn't and can't be. And I think they look.
When are they going to stand up and say exactly that?
Rick Perry did on he gave a speech.
Sure.
But I think that all of them. I wanted to see the Democrats come hard. I think Hillary and Jeb should have punched harder. I think the reality, though, is that if we assume Jeb Bush is the front runner and wins, and if Hillary is the candidate, the last time we had a Bush and a Clinton, a third-party candidate helped put Clinton in the White House, and that was Perot. So I would love to see Trump.
Trump can't even get his own paperwork in on time. The notion that he could get himself on the ballot in 50 states is ludicrous.
It's all a bluff, because Trump is not running for a cause.
I agree.
You either run for president,
yes, he is.
and I ran
Donald Trump.
because you're trying to promote certain causes and make sure it's there, or because you think you can win. Trump is his own cause. That's it. And I think as long as he can get the attention, he's there. He has no reason to invest in trying to do a third party. But as long as we're covering him in different shows, and as long as he's getting attention, he's there. The minute you turn the spotlight to something real, he's going back and try to rebuild what I don't think he'll be able to rebuild, and that's his business.
Peggy Noonan's writing about Trump in the Wall Street Journal this morning. The piece is called Donald Trump's Appeal, and it's its limits. She writes, Trump makes things uncomfortable for Republican candidates who will devise ways of dealing with it. Just by walking into the room, he lowers the tone. His special brand of irresponsibility may prove infectious. Reporters love him because he's colorful, dramatic, walking, talking, clickbait. At the moment, he controls the daily agenda because reporters insist other candidates respond to whatever he says. That will lessen as the novelty diminishes. Think of how powerful he'd be if he had a longer memory or could take tough stands without maligning people. That is his weakness. Blowhards don't wear well. That's Peggy Noonan.
You know what's really interesting about Trump as opposed to all of the other candidates, I think, at least most of the candidates who I've seen personally? Trump gives access to the news media the way the other candidates don't. Trump comes into a room, he's not surrounded by 15 handlers. He's not surrounded by people who say, okay, that's it, that's all the questions now, your 10 minutes is up. He'll sit there and talk to you for 45 minutes or an hour about anything. He'll say the crazy things, he'll say the irresponsible things, but for us in the media, I mean, he's manna from heaven.
Yeah, that's because it's mutually beneficial relationship,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
And because he's promoting himself. I
Yes.
mean, Trump has come to my National Action Network convention and then has got on television and called me a racist. I mean, he wants a crowd. I mean, he's available because that's his point.
Yeah.
And his only point.
So, Mark Halpern, if this is a bubble, as is being suggested around the table, when does it burst? Because it's certainly pretty inflated at the moment. He's second in a lot of polls, second in 2 important states.
Yeah, look, Sam's right that there's a limit on his support. Peggy Noonan says the same thing. He's got a ceiling. But with 16 candidates in the race, if you can hold on to 10 or 15% of support, that may be enough to be a player in some of these primaries and caucuses. I disagree with you all a little bit about Trump's motivations. If he was here to sell his business or sell himself, he'd be going about his life in a different way. I really do believe he thinks he'd be the best president. He really does think there are problems with the country. And an outsider message, a populist message, an angry message has a lot of resonance with a certain sphere of the Republican Party that people like Jeb Bush and Marco Rubio are just not going to capture.
All right, coming up next, another day, another deadline for Iran. How long will the White House allow talks to play out in search of a nuclear deal? We're back after this.